We are diving back into 1 Peter, and if you've got your Bibles, really encourage you to keep them handy. For those who are looking at the sermon notes online, you'll find they're very long. For those who are in the room, we've actually got 2 pieces of paper for you. One is the sermon notes, and the other one is simply titled Doing Good. And it's like a reference sheet that we'll refer to today, but I won't be able to possibly read all the things that are on there. The subtitle for our sermon series is Living Faith in the Real World. And I think it's a really important question. How do you do it? It's a confusing world. And many of us, because of the Enlightenment, have grown up with what we call a sacred-secular divide. The idea that there is the special stuff that happens in churches, and then there's all the ordinary stuff that happens outside of churches. That's actually heresy. God is everywhere and invites us to live faith in every area of our lives. And Peter has been preparing us for the discussion we're going to start today, because now we get to where the rubber hits the road. But before we get to this rubber hitting the road moment, it's important just to cast your eyes back over the previous couple of chapters and just realise that everything he has said so far is the reason he's going to say what he's going to say today about politics, next week about workplace relations and marriages and the church. All of the stuff he's been saying, like the fact that we are actually exiles and foreigners here. This world is not your home. You belong to a different kingdom. Like the fact that you are chosen, you are special. The fact that there is a treasure held for you in heaven. There's an incredible future that is in front of you. Like the fact that you can choose what you think about, and you can set your hope on things that are different to what the world sets its hope on, and that the ultimate thing he has said is whether what he says and what he praises the people he's writing to in modern day, what is now modern day Turkey, back then was kind of the what they call Asia. He says, you never got to meet Jesus in person, but you love him and you believe in him. And everything else we're going to talk about, because one of the dangers is as we start to talk about politics, we start to think it's all about politics. But you got to remember that the rest of what we're going to talk about today is predicated on that stuff. That's the important stuff. And now we get to talk about what does that mean when it comes to politics. Politics in Tasmania is fairly unique. There is only one other jurisdiction in the world that has more politicians per head than Tasmania. And that is Iceland. Iceland has 48.6 elected representatives per 100,000 people. We have, that's us. Iceland has 140 elected representatives per 100,000 people. The next closest is probably New Zealand. They have about 23.6. In fact, nationally, and largely this is because a couple of things. We have the same number of senators that New South Wales does, which is interesting. And we also have a whole bunch of councillors. We have like over 100, I think it might be a couple of hundred councillors. In fact, the municipality of Brisbane alone covers a population twice the size of Tasmania. So nationally, the average is 0.88 elected representatives per 100,000 people. We have 48. And in fact, one Tasmanian in every 2,057 people is a politician. So that just giving you a perspective. And I don't know if you've noticed, politics in Tassie has been a bit divisive over the years. Have you noticed that? Do you remember, who remembers the Gordon below Franklin no dams protests? Who remembers that? Do you know we created the Greens movement here in Tasmania that's gone global because of what was happening back then? I still remember, I was a young fella, I still remember all the controversy about the no dams, that little triangle sticker that was everywhere. Native forest logging and all the stuff around pulp mills, we've got pretty emotional about that. Cable cars, let's not talk about cable cars or salmon, and let's not even bring up a stadium. Let's not talk about a stadium. Some of the most divisive moments have actually been national moments where we've had it feels like a long time ago now, but remember the referendum on the Republic? I was just arriving here in Hobart to be the pastor here at Citywide as the marriage equality debate was unfolding, and we had that big referendum. Of course, we had what feels like a long time ago now, it's only 6 years ago, with two things, lockdowns and vaccines. A lot of people had a lot of strong opinions about that. Some were fairly sure that there was a secret microchip being implanted in everybody so the government could track you. There's a whole lot of funny things going on around vaccines and sadly the divisions that happened around the voice to Parliament. And this is just stuff that's happening in Tasmania and Australia. Let's not even talking about. I love that Jenny, who's here, is continuing to fight for West Papua, and she was part of the fight for East Timor. We're not talking yet about what's happening globally. So in a broken world where there's a whole lot of stuff that is divisive and confusing, what does it mean to be a faithful follower of Jesus? One of the temptations that we can fall into is to think our task is to make sure that what we believe is right is enforced on everybody. And so we want to overpower those who have a view that is different to ours. One of the challenges or the heresies that Christians can go for is to put hope, and too much hope, in power and politics. And there's a theologian by the name of Walter Wink. Sounds a bit like a disability, doesn't it, that name? I don't know how he survived primary school. But he said, now I've mentioned this before, he said in his view, the dominant religion in our society isn't Judaism, Christianity or Islam. It's what he calls the myth of redemptive violence. The idea that you can cure the problems in the world by one heroic act of beating up the bad guys, of overpowering the people who think wrong, and sort of seeing that these people are evil, and if we can just beat up these people and replace the evil people with the good people, then everything will be okay. That is the myth of redemptive violence, the belief that violence saves. And his take is that that's actually the dominant religion in our society. And that's why we love Marvel movies so much. Because we go to watch a Marvel movie and there is a heroic act by a heroic actor that defeats evil by punching it in the face. And that's how you deal with stuff. And if you look back on some of those referendums, it's felt a bit like that. If you look about some of the issues, even to do with stadiums, and that politics devolves into this fight for power, and we start thinking those people are bad and our people are good, and we've got to replace the bad people with the good people. That is not how Christians are to see politics. That is an anti-Christian way of doing politics, the myth of redemptive violence, that somehow you're going to fix the world by getting power, and so the good people, the people that agree with you, have power. You've got to understand, just to put it in perspective, as you're going to hear what Peter says about politics, the world he was talking about was a very broken world. He was not talking to some utopian ideal. In Peter's day, and for the people he was writing to, in what is now Turkey, but was this diverse range of towns and cities, there was extreme income inequality. About 68% of people, or the people he was writing to, were basically living hand to mouth, subsistence living, didn't necessarily know when the next meal was going to come to. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of infants in the world Peter's writing to, the early church, between 1/4 and 1/3 of infants died before their first birthday. Only about 1/2 of people survived to the age of 10. Between 10 and 15% of mothers died during or after their first delivery of a baby. Infectious disease, poor sanitation, poor work conditions, and pandemics were all part of life. The wealthy, unsurprisingly, were much more likely to live longer, and land and resources were controlled by a small number of people. Taxation was done by private contractors who could choose to charge what they wanted as long as they paid the Romans what they asked for. And between 10 and 20% of people were slaves. This is the world Peter's writing into. And in that world, Peter comes and gives a framework for how to deal with the complications of life, and it may not be what you think. He says, dear friends, this is what we began to look at last week, verse 11 and 12. These verses are the epicenter of this letter. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires. Let's talk about being foreigners and exiles. What he's saying is, as followers of Jesus, our lives are not meant to be measured in the way that everybody else on the planet measures their lives. We belong to a different kingdom. And I think he'd want to look us in the eyes and say, do you? Do you? Do you live on the understanding that you belong to a different kingdom? Or are you still playing by the world's rules? He says, the next thing he says, abstain from the sinful desires which wage war against your soul. And again, this is so countercultural. He says, we need to continually watch the temptation to focus on ourselves rather than God or others. What he's wanting us to understand is you can never completely trust your feeling world. Your feeling world will always be mixed. Because you're created in the image of God, you will have beautiful feelings that reflect God's heart. And because you are broken and the world is broken, there are going to be times where you are just full of yourself and you're dangerous. And your feeling world will lead you to places that will do damage for you and for the people around you. Then he says two things in these two verses. Live such good lives and that they may see your good deeds. Live in a way that people outside the church believe is good. Live in a way that people outside the church, people who aren't Christians, look at you and go, that's good. Why are you doing that? Now that only works if you're acting in a way that is different to everybody else. It only works if you believe the story that Peter's been telling up till now. You see, everybody on the planet lives from a story. Everybody on the planet lives from the story, and the Jesus story is completely different to what everybody else lives from. And it invites you to live in a different way. And as you live in a different way, you will act in a way that people outside the church see, that's good. There's something different about them. And then he says, though they accuse you of doing wrong. He says people outside the church won't get it, and they will misread your motives, and they will accuse you of doing the wrong thing. Then he says, as they might accuse you of doing the wrong things, there is going to be a moment where those people, when they get to meet Jesus as he is, will glorify God because of you. Remember, what is God's glory? We've talked about this a few times. God's glory is, there's this tiny little passage in Exodus 34, that reveals God's glory as his nature, his justice, his mercy and compassion. It's what he cares about. And what Peter is saying, when people outside the church, when Jesus comes back, will see who Jesus is and then see how you've been acting and going, they were representing you. They were representing what you care about. That's what it means to glorify God. And the last thing he says is on the day he visits us. One of the things he said in chapter 1 is one of the things that needs to motivate you is that this moment is not the end of the story. There is a big story. Jesus is coming back. There's an incredible future we're looking forward to. And because of that, you don't have to live as though this moment is all there is. There is an incredible future we're looking forward to. So that's what he lays out in those couple of verses. And now he spells out the implications of what that means for dealing with the government. And it may not be what you think he would say. You notice what he says? Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors. Now, you notice he doesn't say, if it's a good government, do what the government says. Because the government he's talking about here, the emperor he's talking about here, is not a good government. This is Nero he's talking about. Nero, the one who under him, there's the story about him fiddling while Rome burnt, we saw the violin today. I don't know that that's a true story, but what we know is true is when this huge fire ripped through Rome, guess who got blamed? The Christians. There had only been Christians for 30 years at that point, but they had spread to a point where the government was worried about them and he blamed the Christians and he began the first real persecution of Christians. This is the guy that Peter is saying, honour, submit to. Him and his representatives. But before he says the governor, he says every human authority. Christians in Peter's day just could not have imagined that they would ever be in any kind of power. That would happen about 270 years later under Constantine. And the idea of democracy, that Athens had played, Greece had played around with it, Rome had played around with it, it was only ever for rich white men. The sort of powerful people. It was kind of like, it really wasn't what we understood democracy to be. And what we understand democracy to be really wouldn't come into vogue until we see what happens through, actually America, and they're wrestling through the whole of what democracy looks like. Some questions at the moment as to whether they're still remembering what democracy looks like. That's a whole other thing. But it's important to hear, Peter is saying, it's not about whether the government's good or not. As followers of Jesus, you actually need to follow the government. Why would he say that? Well, he actually says, they are sent by him, this is verse 14, to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. This echoes what Paul had written in Romans 13, where he says, the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because rulers don't bear the sword for no reason. They're God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment to the wrongdoer. Therefore, it's necessary to submit to the authorities, not because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. For those of us who get a bit frustrated with how things are going in the government, or where we see how things could be different, this is a tough thing to hear. What are you talking about? Do what the government says. Now, he's going to qualify that in a minute. But it is important to understand that the biblical understanding is that we need government. We see in the Bible an example of what happens when government goes missing. The Jewish people were meant to be a people so close to God that they represented God to the world. That went sort of out the window as you track the story, sadly, through the book of Judges, and one of the themes in Judges, as the people of Israel take their eyes off God, what it says actually, it says twice, Judges 17:6 and Judges 21:25, word for word, both times, and this is how the book of Judges finishes. This is the theme. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Imagine a world with no government. Imagine a world where everybody did as they saw fit. Well, you wouldn't have to choose to drive on the same side of the road. You wouldn't have to, worry about stoplights. You wouldn't have to worry about all kinds of things, and you could just abuse people to meet your own needs without any repercussions. You could walk into a shop and say, look, I'll have that, and walk out with things. There would be no consequences for your selfish behaviour. One of the things that Peter is clear about is we're all a bit messy. We all have. He's talking to the Christians and warning them about their selfish desires. The biblical understanding is we need government because we are all a bit messy. There is this other reason we need government, and you see it through the book of Nehemiah, the difference that a good governor makes. The walls around Jerusalem had been down for like 140 years, and a good leader, a good governor comes and says, let's rebuild the walls, and you do this bit, you do this bit, you do this bit. And do you know how long it takes them to rebuild the walls? 52 days. What we see in Peter and Paul is the role of government is to punish those that do the wrong thing and encourage people to do the right thing. And we see right the way through the Bible too, there is a need for us. There are some things, one of the understanding of the Bible is we're all different. We all need each other. And there are things we need to coordinate. So imagine a world where we weren't coordinating and doing things together, where it was up to you to make your own road out front of your house, where it was up to you to remove your own appendix, or so many things. We need others, and those others, where human beings are at their best, we do something that I used to learn on Sesame Street through songs that they used to sing. I don't know if many other people grew up with Sesame Street. It sort of dates me a little bit. But they used to sing songs about cooperation. Human beings are at their best when we cooperate. And a society needs a government to cooperate. Israel was meant to cooperate because they're all looking to God, and the church is meant to be an alternate society where we are all looking to Jesus and cooperating because of him. But we are to be respecters of government. So for Christians, government is necessary because we all have evil desires and can't fully trust our own impulses. Government needs to punish evil and encourage good, and government needs to help us do together what we can't do as individuals. But our hope should never be in the government, because at the heart of our faith is the understanding that people need to be free to choose their relationship to God, and all kinds of people live from all kinds of different stories. And our task is to live in a way that sticks out like a sore thumb. What Peter says next in verse 15, for it's God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. It's God's will that you should act in a way that all the people who think differently, that all the people who don't live from the Jesus story, look at you and go, I'll shut up for a bit because they seem to know what they're doing. What I love about what we do at Anzac Day and encouraging people to come together and experience community, lots of people who aren't Christians at all come and go, this is good. They see something special. They go, this is good. Wherever the kingdom is being expressed, people go, this is good. And it's interesting. I think people intuitively know that Christianity, this is meant to be what Christianity is, and the world calls us out whenever we try and shortcut it and do it by power, whenever we try and do it by coercion. That is not what the church is meant to be. What does it mean to live good? What does it mean to do good? Well, Peter's already referenced that they'll glorify God. Remember, God's nature is justice, mercy, and compassion. Zechariah says, this is what the Lord Almighty says, administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another, don't oppress the widow, the fatherless, the foreigner, or the poor, don't plot evil against each other. What we get, there's this theme right the way through the Bible, that God's heart is justice, mercy, and compassion. It is love with boundaries. And whenever the church is at its best, it is expressing that in very practical ways. And there's not like a silver bullet. There's not like you're just beating up the bad guy and everything gets better. It's lots of little ways. Anzac Day doesn't change the world, but it's a moment where people can experience things. They can experience love, but also can experience respect as individuality. I love what we're doing with our driver mentoring program. It is an expression of God's love. I love our Time Out program. But I actually think one of the questions for us as followers of Jesus is to look around and say, where is the glory of God missing? It's interesting that Zechariah references the weakest people in society, the widows, the orphans, the foreigners and the poor, because they are always the measure of how a society is going. I love that Jenny, who is part of our Lena Valley congregation here, has really given her life to fighting against injustice. Initially, trying to free East Timor so that they could determine their own future. And now there was a dirty little deed done by JFK where he wanted to make sure that Americans could get access, I think it was oil and gas, or certainly minerals, oil, gold, was it? It was gold, the gold in West Papua. So he gave the American president gave West Papua to Indonesia, so that on the proviso that American companies could get their gold. And Jenny's been fighting for West Papua ever since. I actually think one of the invitations for followers of Jesus is to pick a battle. Pick a battle. Find somewhere where justice and mercy and compassion is missing and do something about it. It's interesting, Peter keeps coming back to the idea of exiles. There was another group of exiles that language would have reminded them of. Jeremiah 29 says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. One of the important questions for us is, what does it mean for us to do good? What does it mean for us to glorify God? What does it mean for us to seek the peace of Hobart or Tasmania or the world? Well, I've given you in the online notes and in a companion piece of paper for those who are here in the room at Lena Valley or at Mornington, just a sheet with, this is just Tasmania, about some of the sad ways that justice and mercy and compassion are missing in Tasmania. The stats are staggering. Whether it's the fact that 18,900 Tasmanian kids currently live in poverty. Last night, almost 1,000 children were not sleeping in a home because there was no home for them to sleep in. They were sleeping in out-of-home care because no family was ready to take them. I don't know where to... There are so many stats here about the environment, about the economy, about the cost of living, about domestic violence. I think that what Peter is saying to the followers of Jesus in his time is, don't try and take over the government. Don't try and live in a way that addresses the stuff that God cares about. Live good lives so that people notice. I also on this sheet are two of my heroes. I don't have time to really unpack them, but Martin Luther King was a Baptist pastor who saw what was happening to black people in America and said, this is wrong. As I read my Bible, we're all equal before God. We've got to do things differently. And people misunderstood him. He was one of the CIA's most watched people. And there are still a lot of people that don't like Martin Luther King. But there is a public holiday now called Martin Luther King Day because a Baptist minister was faithful and picked a battle. I love Tim Costello, who was a Baptist pastor in St Kilda, saw the things that were affecting his congregation and started to care for those on the streets, started to fight against poker machines that were ripping the heart out of families that could least afford it, and has spent his life caring and fighting for those that need someone to care and fight for. It's interesting, there's a stat here about poker machines. I don't know if I can quickly find it. Oh, here it is. In March this year, this is just March, Tasmanians lost $17 million to poker machines. $1.8 million of that, this is just the month of March, was in Glenorchy. $800,000 of that was in Clarence, and $6 million of that was in just two casinos owned by the same people that own most of the hotels in Glenorchy. There was a shift that happened where theoretically the monopoly over poker machines was removed, and during that we reduced tax on poker machines from 25% to 10%. So that the one family could get more, anyway. And I think it's serious. That one family owns every poker machine in Tasmania, and they live in Sydney. The Federal Hotel Group is the biggest private employer of people in Tasmania, which is partly why the government has had to create space for them. One of the things we need to do is care about the stuff that God cares about. This is one of the stats that's there. Peter now comes and he sums up his argument like this. He says, live as free people, but don't use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God, honour the emperor. What's he saying? No matter who the government is, they're not in charge of you. You're a free person. It's important to hear that. He starts by saying, honour the emperor. He says, but you're free. Your freedom, though, means you don't get to do what you want to do because you're God's slave? This is the question. Are you? Do you follow the values of the kingdom of God? Or do you follow the values of the world? That's what Peter would be wanting to ask us. The world has a story that will take you away from God's story. Jesus put it like this. He said, the seed that falls on the rocky path are people who respond to the gospel, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other stuff chokes the gospel. God is our King. And it's interesting, this passing line, respect everyone. See that? Show proper respect to everyone. When Christians aren't doing well, when we're getting to the finger pointing, the us and them kind of thing, we are betraying the gospel. You see, every human being is created in the image of God. And so we've got to see through power, through arguments, to people. The people who are hardest to see as people are always the people at the bottom of the status ladder and the people at the top of the status ladder. Our task as followers of Jesus is to love them all and see them as human beings, which is why I think the parliamentary prayer breakfast is so important, where we actually see politicians as people and not just as politicians. So he says, you can see one of the challenges is, this is only 4 verses, but so much is packed in here. Love your brothers and sisters in the church. You need them. Each one of us is called to a different battle. Jane has spent her life mentoring kids in Girls' Brigade and in the hospital system. Heather has spent her life with Girl Guides and caring for Girl Guides. We could go around our church and just talk about the battles people have chosen to step into. The task is to have each other's backs as we step into the things that God's called us to step into. One of the he finishes by saying, remember he's saying, you are God's slaves, fear God, but honour the emperor. And this is the proviso he's putting on the emperor thing. If it's ever a choice between the government and God, he's saying, guess who wins? That's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer had to do, and it's what we need to be ready to do. But sadly, I think when the COVID-19 thing happened and Christians divided against the government, it wasn't so much about following God, it was following my own self-interest. And that's not what we're called to here. We are called to follow God, and if there is ever, as Baptists, we proudly say that if the government ever tells us to do something we believe is against the Bible, we will follow the Bible. But mostly in Australia, the reasons Christians get in trouble are because we're being idiots, not because we're following the Bible, if you don't mind me saying. Just to finish, Martin Luther King said this. And as a way of, he said, to meet hate with a retaliatory hate would do nothing but to intensify the existence of evil in the universe. Hate begets hate. Violence begets violence. Toughness begets a greater toughness. We must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. We must meet physical force with soul force. I think what Martin Luther King is saying is what Peter is saying. Jesus is Lord. Live in a way that demonstrates that to everybody. And that's what actually changes the world. That's how we engage with politics. We were going to show a video, we'll have to show it next week, about the way that our Nepalese congregation is showing love and living this out in the Nepalese context here in Hobart. It's a great video. We'll show that to you next week. But at this point, I'm going to throw back to Dan for one last song. But can I encourage you? I think Peter is calling us to care about the stuff where things are broken, and to love Jesus enough to live differently than the rest of the world. So as we go into this week, can I encourage you, keep your eyes on Jesus and look for the fights, the right kind of fights, that God is calling you to face.